Leo Vance signed up for the Galactic Concordance Interstellar Exchange Program because he was tired of Earth. Tired of the endless gray skies over New Seattle. Tired of the recycled air that always smelled faintly of burnt plastic and regret. Tired of watching his savings dwindle while rent climbed like a panicked spider. The brochure had been sleek, promising adventure, prestige, and a salary that could buy him a real sky, blue, not smog yellow, for the rest of his life. The position, personal starship pilot for a high-ranking diplomat from the Andromeda Reach. It sounded glamorous, important, maybe even a little dangerous in the exciting way. What it absolutely did not mention, in any of the 17 pages of dense legal jargon Leo skimmed while eating synth noodles, was the part about marriage. Specifically, his marriage to the diplomat, who was, as it turned out, not just a diplomat, but Princess Lyra of the celestial dominion of Xylos, and who possessed skin like moonlight on fresh snow and hair that cascaded down her back in a waterfall of pure, shimmering white, framing eyes the color of molten silver. Leo, standing awkwardly in the vast, echoing antechamber of the royal spire of Xylos Prime, felt the brochure's promise curdle into a cold knot of dread in his stomach. He'd been so focused on the ship, the sleek, obsidian-hulled starlight serpent he'd been shown in the hollow simulations, that he'd completely missed the fine print buried in Clause 7, subsection Gamma. Service entails formal bonding with the principal to ensure absolute loyalty and seamless neural interface compatibility. Bonding, as in wedding, as in ring. The ring itself was currently digging into his palm, a cool, heavy band of iridescent metal that seemed to hum with a low, internal energy. He'd been presented with it moments after his arrival, by a stern-faced chamberlain whose own skin was a deep, polished obsidian. There'd been no ceremony, just a quiet, efficient ritual in a small, crystalline chamber filled with the scent of alien blossoms that smelled like crushed ice and ozone. Princess Lyra had stood perfectly still, her expression unreadable, those silver eyes fixed on some distant point beyond Leo's shoulder as the chamberlain slid the ring onto Leo's finger. It had fused instantly, the metal flowing like liquid mercury before solidifying into a perfect, seamless circle. Leo had stammered something about a misunderstanding, about contracts, about needing to speak to human resources. A concept that made the chamberlain's obsidian skin ripple with what Leo desperately hoped was amusement, not contempt. Lyra had finally looked at him then, a flicker of something. Pity? Annoyance? In her luminous eyes before she turned and swept away, leaving Leo alone with his new, permanent accessory and a profound sense of having been spectacularly, cosmically duped. His pilot's uniform, a smart gray tunic with silver piping, suddenly felt less like a badge of honor and more like a very expensive prison jumpsuit. Life in the royal spire was a disorienting ballet of silent servants, gravity-defying architecture, and unspoken rules Leo constantly violated. He learned quickly that direct eye contact with the princess was considered aggressively intimate, that speaking unless spoken to was a grave faux pas, and that the shimmering, gelatinous cubes served at breakfast were definitely not dessert, despite their sweet, floral aroma. His quarters were luxurious, walls that shifted color with his mood, a bed that conformed perfectly to his body, a viewport showing the swirling nebulae of the Xylos system, but they felt sterile, empty. The only thing that felt real was the starlight serpent, docked in the palace's private orbital bay. He spent every spare moment there, running diagnostics, polishing the control yoke, talking to the ship's rudimentary AI, which responded with polite, monosyllabic chirps. It was the only thing that didn't seem to judge him for his clumsy human ways or the ring on his finger that marked him as the princess's. What? Consort? Property? Unwitting groom? He avoided Lyra whenever possible, which wasn't difficult. Her schedule seemed to involve endless councils, meditations in the crystal gardens, and reviewing star charts that glowed with constellations Leo couldn't begin to name. When their paths did cross, usually in the grand, vaulted corridors lit by floating orbs of soft light, the silence between them was thick enough to choke on. She'd incline her head, a gesture so slight it was almost imperceptible, and glide past, her white hair catching the light like spun glass, leaving Leo feeling like a clumsy, noisy ghost haunting her pristine world. The first crack in the ice came unexpectedly, during a routine systems check on the Serpent. Leo was elbow-deep in the primary thruster coupling, muttering curses in a language the ship's AI probably flagged as primitive aggression, when a soft chime announced an unscheduled visitor. He scrambled out, wiping grease on his trousers, expecting a technician. Instead, Princess Lyra stood in the airlock doorway, her usual serene expression replaced by a look of intense concentration. She held a small, crystalline data slate. "Pilot Vance," she said, her voice clear and cool, like water over smooth stones. It was the first time she'd used his name. The long-range sensors are exhibiting anomalous resonance in the theta quadrant. The palace technicians are preoccupied. Can you diagnose it? Leo blinked, surprised she'd come to him. He nodded, trying to ignore the way his pulse jumped. He followed her to the sensor array, his boots clanging on the metal grating, a stark contrast to her silent glide. As he worked, tracing energy signatures on the holographic display, he explained his findings in simple terms, avoiding jargon. He noticed her watching his hands, then his face, her silver eyes thoughtful. Your methodology is inefficient, she stated finally. But your intuition is surprisingly accurate for a baseline human. It wasn't exactly praise, but it wasn't dismissal either. A tiny spark of something, pride, hope, flickered in Leo's chest. Maybe he wasn't just dead weight with a fancy ring. Their interactions became slightly less glacial after that. Lyra began summoning him for minor ship-related tasks, always framed as necessary for her duties, never as personal requests. Leo, in turn, started paying attention to the subtle cues of Xylosian court life, learning when to speak, when to be silent, how to navigate the labyrinthine politics that seemed to swirl around the princess like an invisible storm. He saw the weight she carried, the constant scrutiny, the expectations of her lineage, the pressure of maintaining the Dominion's fragile peace. He saw the exhaustion that sometimes shadowed her silver eyes, quickly masked by her regal composure. One evening, after a particularly tense council session where elder statesmen had questioned her strategic decisions regarding a border dispute with the Cthar Collective, Leo found her alone on the observation balcony, a high platform overlooking the city of Lumina, its spires glowing like captured stars. She wasn't the composed princess. She was just Lyra, shoulders slumped, staring into the void. On impulse, Leo approached, stopping a respectful distance away. He didn't speak, just stood quietly, offering silent solidarity. After a long moment, she spoke, her voice barely a whisper. They see only the crown, Pilot Vance, never the neck that bears it. It was the most vulnerable thing she'd ever said to him. Leo, heart pounding, simply nodded. Seems like a heavy crown, Your Highness, he replied softly. She didn't look at him, but a faint, almost imperceptible relaxation touched her posture. The ring on his finger felt less like a shackle and more like a connection. A strange, complicated, utterly bewildering connection. The fragile truce they'd built shattered with the alarm klaxons. It wasn't a drill. The Cthar Collective, tired of diplomatic posturing, had launched a surprise attack. Not on the Dominion's military outposts, but on the heart of its power, the royal spire itself. Leo was in the mess hall, attempting to decipher the gelatinous cube's true purpose, when the lights flickered violently, replaced by the harsh, pulsing red of emergency beacons. The serene hum of the palace was replaced by the shriek of sirens and the distant, terrifying crump of impacts. Chaos erupted. Servants scrambled. Courtiers screamed. The very air vibrated with panic. Leo's pilot instincts kicked in. Ship, get to the ship. He ran, shoving through the panicked crowd, his heart hammering against his ribs. He burst onto the observation balcony just as a Cthar assault skiff, sleek and predatory like a metal shark, streaked past, its plasma cannons blazing. Below, sections of the city were erupting in fire. And there, standing defiantly in the center of the balcony, bathed in the hellish red light, was Lyra. She wasn't running. She was issuing orders into a comm unit, her voice cutting through the din with steely authority, her white hair whipping around her face like a battle standard. Leo skidded to a halt beside her. Your Highness, we need to evacuate. Now. She turned, her silver eyes blazing with a fierce, protective fire Leo had never seen before. The primary evacuation shuttles are compromised. The Serpent is our only option. Can you get us airborne under fire? Her trust in him, in this moment of utter crisis, was staggering. I can get us anywhere, Princess, Leo said, meeting her gaze without flinching. Just get everyone who can to the orbital bay. I'll meet you there. He didn't wait for a reply, already sprinting towards the service lifts, the ring on his finger burning cold against his skin. Reaching the orbital bay was a nightmare. Cthar boarding parties, clad in chitinous black armor, were already fighting their way through the palace's lower levels. Leo used service corridors and maintenance shafts, his human bulk and lack of grace a liability, but his desperation fueled him. He arrived at the bay to find it partially collapsed, debris raining from the ceiling, smoke stinging his eyes. The Starlight Serpent was intact, thank the stars, but the main access ramp was blocked by a fallen support beam. Lyra was there, directing a handful of palace guards and terrified servants towards the ship's secondary airlock. She saw Leo and relief flashed across her face, quickly replaced by urgency. The beam! We can't get the last group through. Leo assessed the situation. The beam was massive, twisted metal groaning under its own weight. There was no time for finesse. He spotted a heavy-duty gravlift nearby, used for moving cargo. Ignoring the searing heat from a nearby plasma scorch, he wrestled the controls, angling the lift's repulsor field under the beam. "Everyone, get back!" he yelled. He engaged the lift. The beam groaned, shifted, then slowly, agonizingly, rose a few precious feet. "Go! Go!" Lyra commanded, shoving the last of the refugees towards the airlock. Just as the final person scrambled inside, a Kthar warrior, larger and more heavily armed than the others, burst through the smoke, its multifaceted eyes fixed on Lyra. It raised a crackling energy pike. Leo didn't think. He slammed the gravlift controls to maximum. The beam shot upwards, then crashed down with a deafening clang, pinning the Kthar warrior's leg. He shrieked, a sound like grinding metal. Leo grabbed Lyra's arm. "Time to go!" They sprinted for the airlock, diving inside just as the Kthar warrior, enraged, fired its pike. The energy bolt seared past Leo's shoulder, scorching the airlock door as it slammed shut. Inside the ship, gasping for breath, surrounded by the wide-eyed survivors, Leo met Lyra's gaze. Her hand was still on his arm, her silver eyes wide, not with fear, but with something else. Something that looked dangerously like awe. The ring on his finger pulsed with a warm, steady light. Leo threw himself into the pilot's seat, his hands flying over the controls with a speed and precision born of countless simulations and sheer, desperate adrenaline. The Starlight Serpent roared to life, its engine screaming as it tore free of the docking clamps. Through the main viewport, the nightmare unfolded. The Royal Spire, once a beacon of serene power, was a burning ruin, Kthar skiffs swarming like angry wasps. Leo weaved through the chaos, using the ship's agility to dodge plasma fire, his human intuition compensating for the ship's slightly delayed Xylosian targeting systems. He flew like he'd never flown before, pushing the Serpent to its limits, banking so hard the inertial dampeners groaned in protest. Behind him, Lyra was coordinating with the survivors, her voice calm and commanding despite the chaos, her white hair escaping its usual severe style, framing her face in wild strands. She moved to the co-pilot station, her fingers dancing over the tactical console. "Starboard thrusters, 30% boost. They're flanking us," she called out. Leo obeyed instantly, the ship lurching sideways just as a volley of fire streaked past. It was a dance, a deadly, high-stakes ballet where their lives depended on perfect, unspoken synchronicity. In that moment, the ring wasn't a symbol of a forced union. It was a conduit, a silent understanding forged in fire. They weren't princess and pilot, alien and human. They were just Lyra and Leo, fighting for survival in the cold void. They escaped the immediate carnage, the Serpent bleeding atmosphere from a dozen minor hits but spaceworthy. Leo set a course for the nearest neutral system, a dusty trading outpost on the fringes of known space, his hands trembling slightly on the controls now that the adrenaline was ebbing. The survivors were tended to by a stoic medic among them. Lyra stood silently at the viewport, watching the fading glow of her homeworld, her expression unreadable once more, but the tension in her shoulders spoke volumes. The weight of her loss, her responsibility, was crushing. Leo approached cautiously, stopping a few feet away. "We made it, Princess," he said softly. She didn't turn. "Made it where, Pilot Vance?" she asked, her voice hollow. "To a backwater station with no allies, no resources, and a bounty likely on our heads from the Kthar? My world is ash. My people are scattered or enslaved. What have we truly made it to?" Her despair was a physical thing, filling the small bridge. Leo looked down at the ring on his finger, the cool metal a constant reminder of the absurd, impossible situation they were in. He thought of the brochure, the promise of adventure. He'd gotten more than he bargained for, that was certain. But looking at Lyra, her white hair catching the dim light of the distant stars, her silver eyes reflecting the void, he didn't feel trapped anymore. He felt necessary. He cleared his throat. "We made it to the next move, Your Highness," he said, his voice firmer now. And I'm still your pilot. Wherever you need to go, whatever you need to do, the serpent flies for you. That hasn't changed. He met her gaze in the reflection of the viewport. For a long moment, she just looked at him, searching his face. Then, slowly, a flicker of that fierce determination returned to her eyes. Not the despair of a fallen princess, but the resolve of a leader who still had a fight left. She gave a single, sharp nod. Then we find allies, she stated, her voice regaining its steel. We find weapons. We find a way to strike back. She turned fully to face him, her expression serious, but the icy distance was gone, replaced by a hard-won trust. Can your human intuition find us a safe harbor, Pilot Vance? One the Kthar won't expect. Leo managed a tired, slightly lopsided grin. Give me a star chart and a cup of terrible synth coffee, princess. I'll find us a hole to crawl into, and maybe a way to build a bigger hole for them. The ring hummed softly against his skin, no longer a brand of ownership, but a silent pact, a shared burden, and the first, fragile thread of something neither of them had expected to find in the wreckage of a royal palace. Partnership. The vast, indifferent stars stretched out before them, full of danger and uncertainty. But for the first time since signing that fateful contract, Leo Vance didn't feel lost. He had a ship, a mission, and a white-haired princess whose fate was now irrevocably tangled with his own. The adventure, it seemed, was just beginning, and it was far stranger, more terrifying, and infinitely more meaningful than any brochure could have ever. The starlight serpent cut through the darkness, a tiny spark of defiance against the encroaching night, carrying its unlikely crew towards an unknown future, bound together not just by a ring, but by the shared fire of survival and the dawning realization that sometimes, the most extraordinary bonds are forged in the crucible of disaster. The weeks that followed were a blur of cramped quarters, coded transmissions, and the constant hum of the Starlight Serpent's engines. They drifted through the lawless fringe systems, hiding in asteroid belts and derelict freighter graveyards, always one step ahead of Kthar patrols. Leo learned to brew Xylosian tea, a bitter, steaming brew that tasted like burnt cinnamon and starlight, just the way Lyra liked it, though she never said so outright. She, in turn, stopped calling him Pilot Vance and began using his name, Leo, spoken softly in the quiet hours between watches, when the ship was dark and the only sound was the whisper of recycled air. They shared meals in silence at first, then in halting conversation, then in easy banter that surprised them both. Leo discovered Lyra had a dry, unexpected wit, often delivered with the same serene expression that once made him think her cold. She learned he wasn't just a reckless human with good reflexes. He was thoughtful, loyal, and possessed a stubborn optimism that refused to be extinguished, even when their rations ran low and hope seemed thinner than vacuum. One night, while repairing a damaged comms array outside the hull, Leo's tether snapped. He spun away into the void, the ship shrinking rapidly behind him. Panic seized him, until a silver thread of energy lashed out from the serpent, wrapping gently but firmly around his waist. Lyra, standing in the airlock in her ceremonial robes, had overridden safety protocols and used her own bioresonant field, a royal ability rarely used outside palace rituals, to reel him back. When he tumbled back inside, gasping and trembling, she didn't scold him for the risk. She simply pressed a hand to his chest, her silver eyes searching his face, her breath warm against his cheek. "Don't do that again," she whispered, her voice raw with an emotion she couldn't name. In that moment, the last wall between them crumbled. He reached up, his grease-stained fingers brushing a strand of white hair from her face. She didn't pull away. The ring on his finger glowed faintly, pulsing in time with his racing heart. Their love didn't bloom with grand declarations or dramatic confessions. It grew quietly, like moss on stone, persistent, resilient, undeniable. It was in the way she saved him the last nutrient bar, pretending she wasn't hungry. It was in the way he stayed up late recalibrating the ship's shields so she could sleep. It was in the shared glances across the bridge during tense standoffs with pirate scouts, a silent language of trust and understanding that needed no words. One evening, as they watched a binary sunset from a hidden moon in the Zeta Reticuli system, two suns dipping below a violet horizon, painting the sky in impossible hues, Lyra finally spoke the truth that had been hanging between them like stardust. "I signed the bonding contract," she admitted, her voice barely audible over the wind. "Not because of neural compatibility or political necessity. I saw your file, your courage, your humanity. I chose you, Leo. Even before you knew you were choosing me. He turned to her, the twin suns reflecting in his eyes. Then I guess I got lucky twice, he said, taking her hand, the one without a ring, and pressing it to his lips. Once for the ship, and once for you. Their fragile peace couldn't last. The Cthar Collective had declared Lyra a fugitive and placed a galaxy-wide bounty on her head. Worse, they'd activated the ancient Veil of Silence, a network of quantum jammers that severed all long-range communication across the Andromeda Reach. The Dominion was blind, leaderless, falling apart. Lyra knew she couldn't hide forever. She had to return, not as a refugee but as a queen. With Leo's help, they devised a desperate plan. Infiltrate the Cthar command fortress orbiting the dead world of Vexus, disable the Veil generator, and broadcast a rallying cry to the scattered loyalist fleets. It was suicide, but it was also their only chance. The infiltration was a symphony of chaos and courage. Leo flew the Serpent through a storm of defensive drones, weaving through plasma fire with preternatural skill. His hands steady despite the terror clawing at his gut. Lyra, clad in stolen Cthar armor that shimmered unnaturally against her white skin and hair, moved like a ghost through the fortress corridors, her royal biosignature masked by a device Leo had jury-rigged from scavenged parts. They fought side by side. Leo with a pulse rifle he barely knew how to use, Lyra with blades of solidified light that sang as they cut through enemy armor. In the heart of the fortress, surrounded by the humming core of the Veil generator, they were cornered by the Cthar warlord himself, a hulking brute with eyes like smoldering coals. As the warlord raised his weapon to strike Lyra down, Leo threw himself in front of her. The blast hit him square in the chest. He fell, the world going dark at the edges. No! Lyra's scream was raw, primal. She unleashed the full force of her royal resonance, not as a tether, but as a weapon. A wave of pure silver energy erupted from her, shattering the warlord's armor, overloading the Veil generator, and collapsing the chamber around them. She dragged Leo's unconscious body to the Serpent, her white hair matted with blood. Not hers, but his, and her tears falling like liquid pearls onto his ashen face. She flew the ship herself, her hands trembling but sure, back to the hidden moon where they'd watched the twin suns set. For 3 days, she barely slept, tending to his wounds with palace medkits and whispered pleas to gods she wasn't sure listened. On the 4th morning, he opened his eyes. Did we win? He rasped. She smiled through her exhaustion, her silver eyes bright with relief. We gave them a fighting chance. That's all we ever needed to do. The broadcast worked. Loyalist fleets rallied. The Dominion rose again, not through conquest, but through unity. When they returned to Xylos Prime months later, the royal spire was being rebuilt, not as a monument to old power, but as a symbol of renewal. The people cheered not just for their princess, but for the human pilot who had bled for their world. The Council of Elders, once skeptical, now bowed their obsidian heads in respect. And the ring on Leo's finger? It no longer felt like a contract. It felt like a promise, kept, honored, and returned in full. They were married properly this time, beneath the open sky of a healed Xylos, under a canopy of bioluminescent vines that glowed like captured starlight. No fine print, no hidden clauses. Just vows spoken freely, witnessed by friends, allies, and a ship that had become their home. Leo wore a tunic of deep blue, embroidered with silver constellations. Lyra wore a gown of woven moonlight, her white hair unbound, flowing like a river down her back. As they exchanged rings, his the original iridescent band, hers a simple band of human titanium he'd carried from Earth. They didn't need words. Their eyes said everything. Gratitude, love, and the quiet certainty that they had found, in the vast indifference of the cosmos, a home in each other. Years later, their children, too, with skin like pale dawn and hair that shimmered between white and brown, would play in the gardens of the new spire, chasing luminous butterflies and arguing over who got to pilot the Starlight Serpent on its next patrol. Leo, older now, with streaks of gray in his dark hair but the same quick grin, would watch from the balcony, Lyra beside him, her head resting on his shoulder. The ring still hummed softly on his finger, a constant, gentle reminder. He had signed up for a job, for escape, for a sky that wasn't gray. He hadn't known it would lead him to a princess, a war, a near death, and a love that defied species, politics, and even the cold logic of contracts. But as he looked at Lyra, her silver eyes reflecting the twin suns of their adopted world, he knew with absolute clarity. He wouldn't have traded a single chaotic, terrifying, beautiful moment of it. The brochure had promised adventure. It hadn't mentioned the love, the sacrifice, the family, or the quiet joy of building a future among the stars with someone who saw not just the pilot, but the man beneath. And that, Leo thought, smiling as Lyra squeezed his hand, was the best fine print he never read. Time on Xylos Prime flowed differently after the war. It wasn't measured in council sessions or battle reports anymore, but in the slow unfurling of blossoms in the royal gardens, the laughter of children echoing through the rebuilt halls of the spire, and the quiet rhythm of shared mornings on the sun-drenched terrace where Leo and Lyra took their tea. The scars of conflict never fully vanished. The jagged line across Leo's chest from the Cthar blast, the haunted look that sometimes flickered in Lyra's silver eyes when the wind howled like plasma fire. But they were softened by the gentle weight of peace, by the daily miracle of ordinary life. Their wedding, once a bureaucratic formality sealed with a ring and silence, was redone with all the joy they'd been denied. This time, it was held not in a cold crystalline chamber, but in the heart of the newly restored celestial grove, where ancient trees hummed with bioluminescent energy and petals drifted like snowflakes from blossoms that only opened under twin moons. Friends from across the galaxy gathered, grizzled human mechanics from the fringe stations, stoic Xylosian elders who now nodded to Leo as consort, even a reformed Cthar diplomat who brought a peace offering of iridescent seashells from his homeworld. There were no hidden clauses, no neural compatibility waivers. Just two souls, one human, one Xylosian, standing hand in hand beneath a canopy of living light, vowing to walk the stars together, not as duty, but as choice. And when they kissed, the entire grove seemed to sigh in approval, its glow brightening to a warm, golden hue. Peace, once a distant dream, became their daily reality. Lyra ruled not as a distant monarch, but as a queen who walked among her people, her white hair often tousled by the wind as she inspected hydroponic farms or played strategy games with village elders. Leo, no longer just a pilot, became the architect of the Dominion's civilian space fleet, designing safe, efficient transports that carried goods, families, and hope between worlds. He never lost his love for the Starlight Serpent, though. It sat proudly in the orbital bay, retired from combat but still flight-ready, a gleaming monument to their shared history. Sometimes, on quiet evenings, he'd take Lyra for a slow cruise through the nebulae, just the two of them, floating in silence as galaxies swirled outside the viewport, their hands intertwined, the rings on their fingers catching the starlight. And then came the children. First, Kaelin, born with Lyra's luminous silver eyes and Leo's stubborn chin, a whirlwind of energy who could dismantle a hover toy by age 3 and recite Xylosian star charts by 5. Then came Mira, quieter but fiercely observant, with skin that shimmered faintly in moonlight and a laugh that sounded like wind chimes. They were followed by twins, Soren and Alara, who arrived during a meteor shower that painted the sky in streaks of emerald and violet, a sign, the court astrologers said, of great fortune. And finally, little Run, the surprise of their later years, born with a tuft of dark hair that slowly lightened to a soft silver white, a perfect blend of both worlds. The royal spire, once a place of hushed corridors and rigid protocol, became a home filled with noise, warmth, and the delightful chaos of family. Tiny handprints appeared on polished crystal walls. Hover toys buzzed through grand halls. The formal dining room was often abandoned in favor of picnics in the gardens, where Lyra taught the children to weave crowns from glowing vines while Leo told exaggerated tales of his glorious piloting feats, always met with Myra's skeptical eyebrow raise. The children spoke both Terran Standard and High Xylosian fluently, switching between languages mid-sentence, their identities effortlessly spanning two worlds, just like their parents. Leo never stopped being amazed by it all. He'd watch Lyra, regal even in simple robes, patiently helping Ren tie his boots, or laughing as Kaelin tried and failed to teach the palace's robotic butler how to dance. He'd see the way her silver eyes softened when she looked at their children, a tenderness that had once been reserved only for star maps and statecraft. And she, in turn, cherished his unwavering steadiness, the way he could fix a broken toy with the same focus he once used to evade enemy fire, the way he always remembered to bring her favorite spiced tea after long council meetings, the way he still held her hand during thunderstorms, even though Xylosian storms were silent and beautiful, not frightening at all. As the years turned into decades, their love didn't fade. It deepened, like the roots of the ancient trees in the celestial grove. It was in the comfortable silence of their shared study, Lyra reading diplomatic scrolls while Leo tinkered with starship schematics. It was in the way they still danced, slow and close, in the moonlit garden on their anniversary, even when their steps weren't as sure as they once were. It was in the shared glances across a dinner table crowded with grown children and their own partners, a silent language of pride and gratitude that needed no translation. Their children grew into remarkable adults. Kalen became a diplomat, bridging gaps between species with his father's charm and his mother's wisdom. Mira, ever the observer, became a xenobiologist, discovering new life forms in uncharted systems. Soren followed Leo into starship engineering, while Elara led humanitarian missions across the reach. Little Ren, the dreamer, became a poet, his verses capturing the beauty of a universe stitched together by peace. And through it all, Leo and Lyra remained their anchor, their home, their safe harbor. One crisp autumn evening, long after their hair had silvered completely, Leo's dark strands now matching Lyra's in color, if not in origin, they sat on their favorite terrace, wrapped in soft, woven blankets. Below, the city of Lumina glittered like a field of fallen stars, peaceful and thriving. Their grandchildren, 10 of them, with a delightful mix of human and Xylosian features, chased fireflies in the garden, their laughter rising like music on the breeze. The Starlight Serpent, now a museum piece but lovingly maintained by Soren, gleamed in orbit, a silent guardian. Lyra leaned her head on Leo's shoulder, her hand finding his, their rings, still humming faintly after all these years, touching gently. "Do you ever miss Earth?" she asked softly, her voice still clear as water over stones, though softer now with age. Leo looked out at the twin moons rising over the horizon, painting the sky in familiar, beloved hues. He thought of gray skies and synth noodles, of a desperate man signing a contract he didn't understand. He thought of fire and void, of sacrifice and survival, of a ring that became a lifeline, then a promise, then a legacy. "No," he said, squeezing her hand. "I found everything I was looking for right here." And as the fireflies danced and the stars wheeled overhead, Leo Vance and Princess Lyra of Xylos sat in comfortable silence, surrounded by the fruits of their love, their courage, and their impossible, beautiful choice. They had signed up for a job, stumbled into a war, and somehow, against all odds, built a lifetime of peace. And in the quiet hum of the rings on their fingers, in the laughter of their grandchildren, in the steady beat of each other's hearts, they knew, truly, deeply, completely, that they had lived not just happily, but extraordinarily ever after.